Welcome to Raisina Ideas Pod, President Duque. After a very engaging meeting that we had in the presidential palace in Bogota last summer, I thought it would be great to carry forward our conversation on livable cities and really how cities need a transformation and they continue to be in a state of transformation, but whether it's for the better or we need to make amends is really something we need to talk about. And I know that we have been talking about world over that cities are the engines of growth. But you know what? When engine is on the verge of derailment, then it needs a repair. And as the theme of Raisina 2023 goes, I think we need to search for the lighthouse. And cities have actually, in many senses, been the lighthouse of civilization over centuries. So it's important that we really resurrect that importance of cities and give it the course direction and see how and what we need to do to make our cities more livable. Now, I know at Davos last year, you spoke about biodiverse cities. And it's an interesting concept, which I'd like to hear from you more about when you say biodiverse cities. What is this diversity that you have in mind?
Well, thank you so much, Dikshu. It's a great honor for me to participate in this wonderful event. It's great to see you again. And it's also, for me, a pleasure to have this dialogue where I also want to pick your brains on your vast knowledge on cities around the world. So let me first begin by talking about what biodiversities means. This is a concept that we started working with the team of the World Economic Forum and with Klaus Schwab almost 2.5 years ago, where we said that what today matters in order to protect biodiversity is also the way in which cities behave. And all the cities in the world must assume a compromise so that they can effectively protect nature and protect biodiversity. And that happens with clean transportation. That happens with a sound, credible, and sustainable waste management system. It also happens with the energy transition. It happens with clean transportation. It happens when we have a transformation in the energy matrix, giving more priority to non-conventional sources, primarily solar and wind. And we are also looking at cities that are able to create circular economies that protect the rivers, that protect the species of nature that surrounds them. So that basically is the element, the essential element of a biodiversity. We have created a world index. We published a book in the web. And with this idea, what we expect is that more cities around the world start thinking on what is the pressure that they're generating on the energy generation, water sources, etc. So I believe this is a concept that if we integrate it with the concept of creative cities, livable cities, what we're going to have is maybe the best expression. And in that sense, Dikshu, what I would love to ask you is, you were in Colombia when we first launched this concept, and you saw how this concept was evolving. What is your take on the lessons that Colombia has on biodiversities?
So I think what I witnessed in Colombia for me was an eye-opener, because here is a country and the cities in Colombia, whether it's Bogota, whether it's Medellin, Cartagena, all these cities that I traveled, that I'd read so much about, heard so much about, and the state of despair that these cities had been in for many decades, to see the kind of literally an urban utopia, a revolution of sorts that has taken place in how cities have transformed for the better. I thought that was really a very, very pleasant awakening. And that really makes me think that, many times we think that, the most advanced financially, economies in the world are the ones which can take care of the cities. And what we refer to often now, the global south, whether it's Latin America or India and parts of South Asia, that, we cannot afford to make our urban environment better. Now, I thought Colombia was a fitting example to show that that's not the case, that actually you can go about the transformation. In India, for example, we are facing a huge challenge. In the last 4 or 5 minutes that we might have spoken, we had 30 people per minute And that happens every single minute as we continue to talk, and every hour that goes by, you have people migrating in India to cities. Now, that's a huge number, which is actually translating, as many say, to literally India needing another new Chicago, the size of a Chicago city every year to take care of that kind of influx. Now, those are mind-boggling statistics. And I think we need to understand that if we have to really, and that's what intrigues me about your concept of biodiverse cities, that while we all understand that cities are probably the magnet, that's where people need to converge. If country has to progress, people have to progress. But then at the same time, we need to understand the coexistence with nature. And that's what your biodiverse cities talks about. And I think nature and built development need to coexist. They cannot be that buildings are made at the expense of nature. And that coexistence, coupled with the concepts of sustainability, I think is something we really need to think about if we are talking about livable cities.
Good, Dikshu. And in our specific case in Colombia, what we reflected on is that when we talk about climate change, where the pressure for the climate occurs is in cities, because the cities are the ones that generate the pressure on the sources of water. The cities are the ones that generate the pollution out of transportation systems. The cities are the place where the waste management systems in that well managed end up throwing or diverting chemicals to the rivers. So if we start changing the behavior of cities, if we also have the contribution of the cities in terms of reaching a carbon neutrality, but also a nature positive, we'll be able to accelerate what is needed in favor of the protection of biodiversity, primarily in a world that in the last 40 years has lost almost 69% of all the wildlife on Earth. So it is a must that we assume our individual behavior with the overall behavior of cities in order to have a carbon neutral, nature positive planet. And that also takes me, Dikshu, to an issue that you have also analyzed when you visited Colombia. How can we unite the concepts of biodiverse cities, livable cities, with the orange economy that gives us strong support to the idea of creativity, where we can pass from patrimony to functional creations, to the media, to the arts. And with that said, we see that this sector of the economy is not only one of the cleanest sectors in the whole overall GDP platform, but it's also one that adds value and creates intellectual capital. So what is your take on the importance of the orange economy in the development of cities, Dikshu?
No, so I think you're absolutely right. While nature and the aspects of sustainability of coexistence with nature in cities is very, very important. But then if we want to really make our cities livable, we need to look at these aspects which you touch upon in orange economy, which is really, in a sense, cities are infatuated with the idea of building infrastructure. And that infrastructure is many times confined to physical infrastructure. But what we also need to create is a social infrastructure. And I think with economy, we need to see, are our cities also moving towards any kind of social justice? That aspect of the divide that runs deep in many cities across the globe is a cause of concern. And one place, I think, another where cities or citizens rather seem left out is that, the aspect of governance. Because you see that many policies which affect citizens are actually driven by people sitting in ivory towers. Now, is there a level of people participation? Is there a level of people engagement, people's concerns being addressed? These are aspects, I think, which are also equally important if we want to make that city livable. So those aspects, along with the aspects of coexisting with nature, I think are all equally important if we want our cities to be truly livable, rather than our wanting to adapt or make our citizens adapt to this kind of an environment, which really is not something where they belong, but they are being forced to belong. I think the other thing which I would love to have your views also is that, where do we go from here? What are the steps that we need to take? What do you think about that?
So I would like to combine both elements that we have discussed. On the case of biodiverse cities, I think we have to accelerate the energy transition and rely more in our electricity sources on non-conventional renewables, primarily solar and wind, but also allowing to make a strong transition that does not accelerate the economy. So that means you need to have your traditional energy. You start moving from that to more renewable, but you have to guarantee in a certain period of time that your electricity energy matrix for generation is as clean as it can be. And in the case of Colombia, we have one of the cleanest energy matrix in the world, where more than 70% of our electricity comes from water sources, and we're getting close to 20% with non-conventional renewables. That is a must when we talk about biodiversities. But we also have to think about how we protect the people. And that's where clean mobility plays a role. Give incentives for bicycle transportation, try to decentralize, but with a nice positive gentrification where you guarantee that you're creating elements in the city that connect people from their working experience to their areas where they work. So it reduces the timing of commute.
You're right. But you know what, President Duque, I also feel that beyond these aspects, what about looking at some other aspects of, for example, today we talk about cryptocurrency and, we are so infatuated by the GDPs of nations and of cities and mega cities. But what about going back to our roots in many ways? Why don't we look at cities and citizens living there of developing a kind of a happiness index that, the GDP is one aspect, but it's just one aspect of livability in a city.
Well,
the aspect of happiness, how satisfied are those citizens living there? Why can't we think of the concept of looking at barter system? I mean, that is something which existed so happily for centuries.
So I think it's important to have this in consideration, but also identify the type of cities in the world. There are cities that people are very happy, but people are also very, very poor. There are cities that have been improving a lot, but they don't guarantee for the poorest of the poor the experimentation or exercise of development rights. However, as you well said, we have to think differently than just income per capita. And that's why the Human Development Index has been so important. But then you add another figure, which is the happiness index. This is a work that has been developed broadly with a great amount of debate in Harvard University. And when we want to test the happiness is also connected to 5 things that we need to have in cities. One thing is our neighborhoods. They need to be green, they need to be creative, they need to have sports, and they need to have security. Because security is a democratic value, but it's also a public asset. We also have to try to connect talent, technology, and tolerance for all sectors and minorities. And we need to make cities friendly for or in favor of SMEs, startups, and the development of forms of entrepreneurship. So I do agree with you that those are trigger of happiness. They represent the cornerstone of the transformations that we require in this century and especially in this decade to guarantee that we achieve the results that we want to achieve in terms of the sustainable development goals. But then I also turn it to you, and that's where I will ask Dikshu, you're an architect, but you've also analyzed how cities are being designed. And you come from a country that is maybe the world's biggest democracy in terms of population. So many things take longer to be achieved. But what do you think has to happen in India in order to have better urban designs in favor of having more happy, friendly, and biodiverse cities?
So I think it's a subject we could talk about at length, but I would just say that this is just the beginning and there's a lot that we need to look at of how to make our cities livable. But to answer your question, I think in India, what I would look back it is our roots and what made our settlements. I would move forward from the concept of cities and say our settlements really very, very successful over centuries. And I think if we search for the answers in our roots, there are many lessons we can learn from there. So the concept of diversity, the concept of culture, the concept of coexistence, the concept of context and climate, all these aspects, how we looked at creating sustainable design. If you travel across India and you see settlements, you see that they were really sustainably designed. Why did we lose that concept? How do we bring that back? I think there are many, many thoughts on that, which one needs to now explore. But I think that's time for another conversation we can have another time. President Duque, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about livable cities. And as long as we keep this conversation going, as long as this concept is alive, I think there is hope. Because what our cities definitely need, as Raisina 2023 has been about, that there's a tempest brewing, beating down on the doors of our cities, and the lighthouse has to emerge to find the right solutions to make our cities once again the epitome of civilization. So thank you very much, and we'll stay continued on these conversations in future.
Thank you so much, Dikshu. And I fully agree that we have to connect both the concepts. Having orange cities in favor of culture and creativity, and having biodiversities that accomplish the responsibility of having a net zero, but also a nature positive world. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.